Hello, this is Richard Thornton with the People of One Fire. Why would an organization focused on Native American history be interested in Spanish and French colonial history? Well, phony colonial history was having an increasing impact on academia's simplified version of our cultural history. By simplified, I mean this. Over the past, say, 10 decades, there's been an increasing tendency for anthropologists to dumb down the southeastern cultures, simplify them, make their origins more easier to understand in one thought, when in fact we see a very complex web of people mingling to form the cultures that were here when the Europeans arrived. Southeastern academicians were using the bogus location of Fort Carolyn and Fort San Mateo in Jacksonville as a benchmark for locating all the Native American tribes in the southeast, which is throwing everything off. When combined with their lack of knowledge about our languages, this led to misinterpretation of ancient town sites and cultural history, such as, that really happened, by the way. What we're going to do in this program is mix my narration with the reading of the text yourself and soundtrack. If you don't hear me speaking in front of a particular view, you know you're supposed to read it. Let's put it that way. Besides that, you probably much rather listen to this beautiful music than my voice anyway. Here we go. Notice in this engraving by Theodore de Brij from the Netherlands that he portrayed Fort San Mateo as being a triangular footprint just like Fort Carolyn. He also assumed that the two forts were in the same location. Neither assumption is necessarily valid. This detail from his engraving, notice on the upper part of the image numerous bodies hanging from the trees. Actually, the total was somewhere around 250 to 300 Spaniards were hung from the trees and left there to rot. It must have been a very macabre scene. All historic French, Spanish, Dutch, and British maps place Fort Carolyn on the south channel of the Altamaha River in Georgia, and until 1722 the Altamaha River was called the May River. The St. John's was never called the May River until the mid or late 20th century, when Jacksonvillians decided that was the fact. This is very important information. You must have both archival and physical proof to change bogus history in such highly institutionalized situations as the locations of Fort Carolyn and Fort San Mateo. Keep in mind that the original tract of perhaps 50 acres associated with a sign saying this is the site of Fort Carolyn has grown to a 72 square mile National Park Service facility with millions and millions and millions of dollars of federal investment in it. That is an enormous barrier to changing bogus history. Were the earthworks of Fort San Mateo still visible? They're not, obviously not in the St. John's River Basin, but can they be seen elsewhere? Well, yes, maybe so. This is a view of the Altamaha Delta. It's slightly different today than it was in 1565. There was much more snow in the mountains back then, and so there was more water coming down in a peak flow during the spring months. As a result, the upper Satilla River, which is here, looped around and joined the Altamaha there. So when there was a high flow on the Altamaha, or the Altamaha was blocked, the water would come down this way, much of the same way there used to be a separate outlet for the Mississippi River when there was more water coming down. This is another view from straight up a satellite image. Broughton Island is a very important site that is the anchor at our benchmark for finding Fort San Mateo. Here's another view. This is a U.S. Coast Guard navigation map. Both in the 16th century and later part of the 18th century, the Altamaha River Delta was the most intensely cultivated region in the entire Atlantic coast of North America. In 1773, William Bartram visited the ruins of several Native American towns sites with mounds here, and also was brought by his host on Broughton Island to the ruins of a European fort that he described being 1 to 2 miles away. Now this is very important. I'm going to read from William Bartram's book. It's amazing that someone never noticed this before. But perhaps they read it and thought, well, the National Park Service says that Fort Carolyn is on Jacksonville, therefore it must be true, so we just ignore what Mr. Bartram says. But here, I'll read it to you. On the west banks of the south channel of the Altamaha, 10 or 12 miles above its mouth, and nearly opposite Darien, are to be seen the remains of an ancient fort, or fortification. It is now a regular tetragon terrace, about 4 feet high, with bastions in each angle. The area may be contained around an acre of land, but the fosse, that's a moat or ditch, which surrounds it, is nearly filled up. There are large live oaks, pines, and other trees growing upon it, and in the old fields adjoining it. It is supposed to have been the work of a French or Spaniards. A large swamp lies between it and the river, and considerable creek runs close by its works and enters the river through the swamp a small distance above Broughton Island. So, Fort Carolyn was triangular plan, but evidently DeBry's painting of Fort San Mateo is wrong. Fort San Mateo was rectangular. Broughton Island is a possible site of the ill-fated San Miguel de Guadalupe colony founded by Lucas Vaquez de Alillon. The possible sites of Fort San Mateo were 1 to 3 miles west of the island. Note that how near the visible infrared spectrum pops out areas of long-term occupation. Look here, this is where there were, who knows, Indian villages, maybe the Spanish colony from 1526, but it's very obvious when you use this spectrum of analysis. This is the area where James Ford worked. There was a proposal to make the Santo Domingo mission, or supposed Santo Domingo mission, a national park. Think how different things would have been, because the national park would have included the sites of Fort San Mateo and Fort Carolyn, most likely. It would have been this whole area. Ford determined that what they thought was a mission was actually a sugar mill from the 1700s, which to me sounds very historic, but he unfortunately recommended not becoming a national park, and then later, after World War II, Georgia gave the land to the Southern Baptist Convention to make an orphan's home, and it went out of state hands. We look at the infrared for that location. We have some surprises. This is what James Ford called an Indian mound. It appears to be the structure that William Bartram saw. So I think we found Fort San Mateo. We'll look at it closer with other spectrums of light. With some photographs you see shells there, and it could be that the soil had such a high content of shells that it leached out and then left shells, or it could be that past floods have dumped shells on the site. This is 6 Mile Creek, which is described by Bartram. Also, it's described by Spanish commentaries and by the French as being a wide creek going past the east side of the fort. So this appears to be a match. Here we look at it closer. This is the site a little bit closer. You can see the winding streams. This is probably the physical features that archaeologist James Ford labeled an Indian mound, but he did not excavate the structure, unfortunately. I'll blow it up some more. Look what we get. We have a hexagon with a revetment out in front of it that matches perfectly the drawings. This trapezoidal physical feature meets every criteria of the ancient French or Spanish fort that was visited by William Bartram in 1773. Is the same size as Fort San Mateo, San Felipe, which was built on Parris Island, South Carolina, simultaneously with Fort San Mateo. This is how it looked. Now, this is the site. We're not sure about Fort Carolyn. It's probably either right here or here. This location has a large rise in it, but it may be from highway construction when I-95 was built. This site seems also to match drawings of Fort Carolyn from the 1500s. Again, there's been no archaeological work, so we can't be sure. The earthwork matches the footprints of Fort San Felipe II and Fort San Marcos II in Spanish town of Santa Elena on Parris Island, South Carolina. These were built with standard plans issued to engineers in the Spanish Army. Minor forts were just built to cookie cutter type dimensions, and so it's very likely that since these forts are all the same size, that what we have found is indeed the site of Fort San Mateo. But having access to standard plans enabled me to do a detailed drawing of what the fort probably looked like and explain the different parts. You have bastions. This is the fosse, which is the ditch. Entrada is the fortified gate. Casa Fuerte is the blockhouse, where the infantrymen were upstairs and the gunpowder and ammo were downstairs. Here's a view at a distance. This would be south. That direction would be north. We're going to approach the fort exactly the same way that the French and the Georgia Indians did back in 1568. This is a revetment out in front of the fort in which a powerful cannon was placed, and also there's infantry here. Much of the bloodiest fighting occurred at this spot because when they attack this fort, cannons from the main fort can blast them, and so it becomes a killing field. But eventually, the French and the Indians, were able to overcome the defenses here. Then they swam across the tidal creek to the main fort. We're moving closer. This is the view if you're swimming facing a giant shotgun. Here it is closer. This was capable of killing 50, 60, 100 men at one time. It was filled with scrap metal and small lead balls. This is the gate to the building. There would be a door here plus a drawbridge there that normally would make it impossible to get in the fort. My guess is that the Spanish were not expecting anybody to attack them on April, they had no wind. There was any enemy forces in the vicinity anyway, and so they probably had the guard down. Now we're inside the heart of the fort. This is another one of those giant shotguns. This is the Casa Fuerte. It has no windows downstairs. The infantrymen fired from gaps in the shingles and the thatch upstairs. Very tiny holes that you couldn't even see from the outside, so there was no way of aiming towards them. Looking down at a bird's eye, you see the 4 bastions. The fixed cannon, or ship's cannon, were for defense against ships. They fired higher velocity, larger shells that were meant to penetrate ship. The cannon with wheels are more mobile. They were intended to be used against infantry, and they could be rotated to wherever they were needed to feint off attacks. Like if this cannon was turned to that hole, they could fire against anybody trying to climb the wall. Notice that there is a step down on all sides of the fort. This enabled the arquebussmen to step down below the line of fire, load their weapon, stand up here, and then fire at the enemy and then step down. This is a well. That's an outhouse. That's an outdoor kitchen. Here's another view that'd be from the east looking west. A close-up view of a bastion. Again, you can see the long, powerful ship's cannon. They're not very mobile, but they're capable of doing terrible damage to a ship. Again, this is a closer view of a mobile field cannon that could be fired here, fired there, or actually rolled down this ramp and fired against anybody attacking the main gate. Here are the 2 giant shotguns, for lack of a better term. Another view of the bastion. You can see there's slight differences in 16th century cannon than those used in later centuries. But it all came to an end on Easter Sunday, April 18th, 1568. Every man in all 3 forts that the Spanish had on the end of the May River, or the Altamaha, either died in battle or were hung. Thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoy our programs.